What if the ring on a billionaire's hand wasn't his at all, but proof of a family betrayal buried for generations? Tonight, a waitress dares to speak the unthinkable, and her words will turn the Pierce dynasty upside down. The night had started like any other inside the corner booth diner. The neon sign buzzed above the rain-slicked street, and the smell of frying bacon clung to the air. Eliza Holloway tied her faded apron tighter around her waist, trying to shake off the fatigue that came from too many double shifts. She carried a pot of coffee, smiling politely, hiding the storm that always lived just beneath her skin. When the door opened, the usual chatter died down. A man walked in, and he wasn't just another customer. He moved with the calm authority of someone used to owning every room he entered. His tailored suit looked out of place against cracked vinyl booths. The staff whispered his name like a curse: Gideon Pierce, the billionaire whose family owned half the city. Eliza had never served him before. To her, he was just another face in an expensive suit. She approached his booth, pen poised, professional smile ready. "Coffee black," he said, not even glancing at the menu. His voice was smooth, but carried the weight of command. As she set the cup before him, her eyes caught something that made her breath freeze. On his right hand gleamed a ring, pale gold, carved like feathers, with a tiny sapphire eye in the center of a phoenix. She knew that ring. She had seen it countless times resting inside a velvet box beside her mother's hospital bed. The words tumbled out of her mouth before she could stop them, soft but clear enough to cut through the din of the diner. "Hi, sir," she whispered, almost in disbelief. "My mother has a ring just like yours." For a moment, time seemed to stop. Gideon's hand froze halfway to the cup. His head turned, and his sharp blue eyes locked onto hers. The polite dismissal vanished from his face, replaced by something colder, an intensity that made Eliza's stomach twist. The air between them grew heavy. Other customers sensed it too, their conversations faltering. Her friend Chloe, working the counter, shot her a worried look, silently mouthing, "What did you just say?" Eliza swallowed hard, realizing too late that she had broken some invisible rule. Gideon Pierce leaned forward, his voice dropping to a dangerous calm. "What did you just say about this ring?" Eliza Holloway was only 24, but life had aged her far beyond her years. She had the kind of eyes that carried both exhaustion and defiance, eyes that told stories of sleepless nights and unspoken sacrifices. People who met her at the diner saw only a waitress with a polite smile and steady hands. They didn't see the bills stacked on her kitchen table, the weight of survival pressing down on her every single day. Her mother, Laura, was everything to her. Once vibrant and strong, Laura now lay in a hospital bed, fighting a cruel illness that drained both her body and the family's savings. The doctors spoke in terms of treatments and costs, always costs. Every visit ended with another sheet of paper, another bill Eliza had no idea how to pay. But she never let her mother see the panic behind her smile. She simply held her hand, whispering promises that somehow, some way, she'd keep them afloat. It wasn't just her mother. Eliza had grown up without a father, raised by a woman who had given her entire life to protect her child. Laura often told her that they didn't need anyone else, that the two of them against the world was enough. But there were secrets in her mother's eyes, stories she never told. And whenever Eliza asked about the gold ring resting in its velvet box, Laura only said, "It's a promise. One day, you'll understand." That ring became a symbol of comfort during the darkest nights. Eliza would sometimes slip it from its box, holding it between her fingers, feeling its weight as though it could anchor her in a storm. She never imagined she'd see the same design on the hand of a billionaire who could crush people's lives with a single decision. Her job at the corner booth was nothing glamorous, but it was steady. She worked double shifts, washed her uniform by hand, and took buses across town to save gas money. Her friends often told her she deserved more, that she was too smart and too kind to spend her life serving coffee. But dreams didn't pay hospital bills. So she stayed. Behind her quiet strength was a heart constantly breaking. She longed for rest, for a future where her mother could smile without pain, where the ring on her nightstand wasn't a reminder of a mystery Eliza had no time to solve. But deep down, She feared that life had chosen her role, to be invisible, to serve, to endure. And yet, that single sentence she had just spoken to Gideon Pierce had shattered the careful mask she wore. At that moment, she wasn't just a waitress. She was a daughter defending her mother's honor without even realizing it. Now, with the billionaire's icy eyes fixed on her, Eliza understood. She had stepped onto a path that could either save her family or destroy them completely. The corner booth was not the kind of place where billionaires lingered. Its cracked vinyl seats, humming fluorescent lights, and greasy fryers belonged to working-class people who came in for late-night meals or cheap coffee refills. Yet Gideon Pierce's presence transformed the air. The diner, so ordinary a moment ago, felt like a stage where two worlds collided, the struggling waitress and the man who lived among glass towers and penthouse views. But Gideon didn't stay in that booth for long. The next evening, fate placed Eliza in a setting she could never have imagined. It started with an envelope, thick and embossed with gold lettering, delivered by a courier who looked more like a bodyguard. Inside was an invitation, Pierce holding charity gala, black tie required. Eliza nearly tore it in half, thinking it had been sent by mistake. But Chloe, her co-worker, stared at it wide-eyed. "He wants you there," Chloe whispered. Why else would they invite a diner waitress? She had no gown, no jewels, no car to take her to such a place, but Chloe insisted on helping, lending her a simple black dress and curling her hair until her reflection in the mirror was almost unrecognizable. For one night, Eliza looked less like a tired waitress and more like a woman who belonged in another world. The gala was held at the Grand Marlowe Hotel, a palace of marble and gold leaf. Chandeliers dripped light onto polished floors, and a string quartet played softly in the background. The room sparkled with diamonds, champagne glasses, and the murmurs of the elite. It was a theater of wealth, where every smile hid calculation, and every handshake was a deal in disguise. Eliza stepped inside, her heart racing. She had never seen such luxury except in magazines. Women floated in gowns that cost more than her mother's entire medical debt. Men laughed casually, their watches alone worth more than a year of her wages. She felt small, out of place, like a shadow in a world of blinding light. Then she saw him. Gideon Pierce stood near the center of the room, surrounded by admirers. His presence dominated the space, commanding attention without effort. The same ring glinted under the chandelier, a silent reminder of the storm between them. When his gaze fell on her, conversations around him paused. The billionaire and the waitress, an impossible pairing, had just locked eyes. Whispers spread quickly across the room. Who is she? Why is she here? The elite studied her like she was an intruder, a puzzle that didn't fit. Eliza's throat tightened, but she lifted her chin, forcing herself not to shrink. Across the glittering ballroom, Gideon raised his glass slightly in her direction. A gesture that promised confrontation was inevitable. The gala sparkled with false smiles, but beneath the glitter, tension brewed like a storm. Eliza felt it the moment she stepped further into the ballroom. Every set of eyes seemed to weigh her, judge her, strip her of any claim to belong. But the sharpest gaze did not come from Gideon Pierce. It came from another man who approached with a cold, polished smile. Julian Pierce, he introduced himself, voice smooth as silk but laced with contempt. "I assume you're the waitress my cousin insisted on inviting." Cousin. The word hit her like a stone. So this was Gideon's blood. Sharper, younger, dressed in arrogance tailored to perfection. His eyes flicked over her borrowed dress, her trembling hands, and finally landed on her face with a smirk that felt like a slap. "You must be very entertaining," Julian continued, lowering his voice so only she could hear. It's the only explanation for why Gideon would drag a stranger from a diner into a room full of investors. But let me give you a word of advice. Don't embarrass yourself, or us. Eliza's chest tightened. She wasn't here to play games. She wanted answers about the ring, about the insult Gideon had thrown at her mother. But Julian's tone made it clear. This wasn't just about jewelry. It was about bloodlines, power, and keeping people like her in their place. As the night unfolded, Julian shadowed her every move. When she stood near the buffet, he whispered snide remarks. When she tried to slip into the background, he deliberately drew attention to her. "Gentlemen," he announced loudly at one point, "this is Miss Holloway. She serves coffee better than anyone in the city. Isn't it charming that she's trying to mingle with us?" A ripple of cruel laughter followed. Eliza's cheeks burned, but she clenched her fists, refusing to let tears fall in front of them. She reminded herself of her mother's frail smile, of the promise she'd made to protect her honor. From across the room, Gideon watched. His expression was unreadable, but he did nothing to stop Julian. That silence cut deeper than any insult. Maybe they were the same, two sides of the same cold dynasty. Chloe's words echoed in her mind. Why else would he invite you? But the answer seemed cruelly clear now. Not because Gideon respected her, not because he believed her story, but because bringing her here was another test, another stage for humiliation. Julian leaned close again, his breath brushing her ear. "If you think a ring gives you a place among us, you're even more foolish than you look. That ring is ours, our legacy. Whatever trinket your mother clings to, it's a lie." Eliza froze. How did he know about her mother's ring? Julian's smile widened, as if he'd read her thoughts. "Careful, Waitress. Secrets have a way of destroying the people who chase them." The gala reached its peak. Champagne glasses clinked, the string quartet shifted to a lively waltz, and the glittering elite moved as if in a dance of power. Yet Eliza stood at the edge of the room, fighting to steady her breathing. Every glance she received reminded her she didn't belong here. But worse than the stares was the presence of Gideon Pierce, circling her like a predator savoring his prey. When the master of ceremonies announced Gideon's upcoming speech, the crowd gathered near the stage. Gideon moved with unshakable authority, commanding silence with nothing more than his presence. Eliza stayed in the back, trying to disappear into the shadows. But Julian had other plans. He raised his voice deliberately, just loud enough to ripple through the nearest group of guests. "Tell me, Miss Holloway, how does it feel to trade your apron for a borrowed dress? Do you imagine yourself as one of us tonight?" Laughter erupted around her, sharp and merciless. Eliza's face flushed crimson, but before she could retreat, Julian pressed harder. He clinked his glass to demand attention. The room quieted, all eyes shifting toward him, and then to her. "Ladies and gentlemen," Julian declared with mock grandeur, "allow me to introduce our guest of honor. Not a politician, not a business partner. No, tonight we are graced by a waitress from a corner diner." He gestured toward her like she was part of an exhibit. "She claims her family owns a ring identical to the Pierce heirloom. Imagine the audacity!" A murmur of shock and amusement spread through the crowd. Eliza felt the ground tilt beneath her. Gasps and whispers tangled together like knives in her back. Some laughed openly. Others stared with curiosity, waiting for her to defend herself or collapse. She opened her mouth, but no sound came. The humiliation was suffocating. Her mother's ring, the one she had always cherished, was now being mocked as if it were a cheap forgery. The image of Laura's frail hand clutching that ring flashed in her mind. Then came the final blow. Julian smirked, lifting his own glass. Of course, perhaps she is telling the truth. Perhaps her mother really does have a copy. Thieves and liars, after all, are known for clinging to trophies. The insult struck like lightning. A thief, a liar, words that did not belong anywhere near her mother's name. Eliza's chest burned with fury and shame, her hands trembling at her sides. From the stage, Gideon paused mid-speech, his gaze fixed on her. For a moment, Eliza thought he might intervene. But he didn't. His silence was consent. His cold detachment was the cruelest wound of all. The ballroom roared with laughter and whispers as Eliza stood alone, humiliated, realizing that in this world of power and wealth, she and her mother's honor had just been dragged through the dirt. The ballroom hadn't truly recovered from Eliza's words. Whispers clung to the air like smoke, drifting from cluster to cluster as the city's elite tried to make sense of what had just happened. A waitress, someone who didn't even belong in their world, had silenced an entire gala with nothing but conviction. Julian forced a laugh, raising his glass once more as if to dismiss the tension. "Touching," he sneered, "but stories don't change facts." Yet even he seemed unsettled, his smile stretched too thin, his eyes darting toward Gideon for support. But Gideon was no longer simply observing. He stepped down from the stage, his tall frame cutting through the crowd with quiet authority. The murmurs softened into silence as he approached Eliza, his gaze never leaving her face. Every step felt like a judgment, a sentence waiting to be delivered. When he stopped before her, the tension was unbearable. He looked down at her with those pale, unreadable eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low enough for only her and a few nearby guests to hear, he asked, "What is your mother's name?" Eliza hesitated, her heart hammering. Saying it felt like exposing her mother to a world that had already tried to brand her a thief. But she met his gaze and answered firmly, "Laura Holloway." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, or perhaps unease. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to the crowd. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said coolly. "Business calls?" With that, Gideon motioned toward his assistant, who appeared almost instantly. To Eliza's shock, he addressed her directly. "Escort Miss Holloway to my office. Tonight." The command rippled through the room. Gasps rose, followed by a wave of speculation. Gideon Pierce never invited outsiders into his private dealings, especially not someone who had just defied his family name in front of hundreds. Julian's face darkened, his polished calm slipping into fury. He grabbed Gideon's arm. "You can't be serious. She's—" "Enough!" Gideon cut him off sharply. The single word silenced his cousin, though the hatred in Julian's eyes burned hotter than ever. Eliza stood frozen, her pulse racing. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to run before she was swallowed whole by their world. But another thought burned stronger. The truth. If Gideon Pierce wanted answers, maybe this was the only chance she'd ever have to defend her mother and unravel the mystery of the ring. The assistant gestured toward a side door, leading her away from the glittering cruelty of the ballroom. Eliza cast one last glance at the chandeliers, at Julian's sneer, at the sea of curious faces, and as the door closed behind her, she realized she was stepping out of humiliation and into something far more dangerous, a confrontation with the most powerful man she had ever met. The ballroom hadn't truly recovered from Eliza's words. Whispers clung to the air like smoke, drifting from cluster to cluster as the city's elite tried to make sense of what had just happened. A waitress, someone who didn't even belong in their world, had silenced an entire gala with nothing but conviction. Julian forced a laugh, raising his glass once more as if to dismiss the tension. "Touching," he sneered, "but stories don't change facts." Yet even he seemed unsettled, his smile stretched too thin, his eyes darting toward Gideon for support. But Gideon was no longer simply observing. He stepped down from the stage, his tall frame cutting through the crowd with quiet authority. The murmurs softened into silence as he approached Eliza, his gaze never leaving her face. Every step felt like a judgment, a sentence waiting to be delivered. When he stopped before her, the tension was unbearable. He looked down at her with those pale, unreadable eyes. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, in a voice low enough for only her and a few nearby guests to hear, he asked, "What is your mother's name?" Eliza hesitated, her heart hammering. Saying it felt like exposing her mother to a world that had already tried to brand her a thief. But she met his gaze and answered firmly, "Laura Holloway." Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, or perhaps unease. He didn't respond immediately. Instead, he turned to the crowd. "Enjoy the rest of your evening," he said coolly. "Business calls." With that, Gideon motioned toward his assistant, who appeared almost instantly. To Eliza's shock, he addressed her directly. "Escort Miss Holloway to my office. Tonight." The command rippled through the room. Gasps rose, followed by a wave of speculation. Gideon Pierce never invited outsiders into his private dealings, especially not someone who had just defied his family name in front of hundreds. Julian's face darkened, his polished calm slipping into fury. He grabbed Gideon's arm. "You can't be serious. She's—" "Enough!" Gideon cut him off sharply. The single word silenced his cousin, though the hatred in Julian's eyes burned hotter than ever. Eliza stood frozen, her pulse racing. Every instinct screamed to refuse, to run before she was swallowed whole by their world. But another thought burned stronger. The truth. If Gideon Pierce wanted answers, Maybe this was the only chance she'd ever have to defend her mother and unravel the mystery of the ring. The assistant gestured toward a side door, leading her away from the glittering cruelty of the ballroom. Eliza cast one last glance at the chandeliers, at Julian's sneer, at the sea of curious faces. And as the door closed behind her, she realized she was stepping out of humiliation and into something far more dangerous, a confrontation with the most powerful man she had ever met. The hospital always smelled of disinfectant and despair. Eliza hated it, but it had become her second home. After the gala and her confrontation with Gideon, she drove straight there, her heart pounding with questions she couldn't silence. Her mother's room was dimly lit, the steady beep of the heart monitor breaking the silence. Laura lay propped against thin pillows, her once strong frame now frail and fragile. Yet when she saw Eliza enter, her eyes softened with that same warmth that had carried them through every hardship. "You're late, sweetheart," Laura whispered with a tired smile. "Long shift?" Eliza hesitated, dropping into the chair beside her. She wanted to shield her mother from the storm she had just walked through, but the words tumbled out anyway. "Mum, I saw a man tonight, a powerful man, and he had a ring just like yours." Laura's face went pale. Her hand, thin and veined, instinctively moved towards the nightstand where the velvet box sat hidden. "You didn't say anything, did you?" "I did," Eliza admitted, guilt tightening her throat. "I told him you had one too, and now he wants to see it." Her mother closed her eyes, pain etched deeper into her features than any illness could carve. For a long time she said nothing. The monitor ticked steadily, measuring the silence. Finally, she opened her eyes and whispered, "Some doors are meant to stay closed, Eliza." Eliza's chest ached. "But why? Why hide it? He accused you of being a thief. I couldn't stay quiet." Laura reached for her daughter's hand, squeezing it with surprising strength. "Because the truth isn't always freedom. Sometimes it's a chain heavier than lies. That ring, it carries a story soaked in betrayal and power. If they know you have it, they won't stop until they take everything from us." Eliza shook her head fiercely, tears burning her eyes. "I don't care what they try to take. I won't let them drag your name through the dirt. Tell me the truth, Mum. Please." But Laura only shook her head, her gaze filled with both love and fear. "Promise me you'll leave it alone." Eliza's throat tightened. She wanted to promise, to ease the worry etched into her mother's face, but Gideon's cold command echoed in her ears. "Bring me the ring." And Julian's sneer still burned in her memory. "Thieves and liars." Eliza kissed her mother's forehead, whispering, "Rest, Mum. I'll take care of everything." As her mother drifted back into uneasy sleep, Eliza opened the velvet box once more. The phoenix gleamed under the faint hospital light, its sapphire eye burning with secrets. And in that moment, Eliza knew she couldn't keep her promise. She had to uncover the truth, no matter the cost. Eliza barely slept that night. Every time she closed her eyes, the images returned. Julian's sneer, Gideon's piercing stare, her mother's frail hand clutching the ring as though it were both a treasure and a curse. The weight of it pressed against her chest like a stone. By morning, exhaustion clung to her, but her resolve was sharper than ever. She couldn't let her mother's name hang under the shadow of theft. Gideon's words haunted her. "Bring me the ring." She sat at the kitchen table, the velvet box open before her. The phoenix ring glimmered in the weak daylight, its sapphire eye catching fire with every tilt. It was beautiful, yes, but more than that. It was dangerous. Her mother's warning echoed in her ears. The truth isn't always freedom. Sometimes it's a chain. Still, Eliza couldn't turn back. The humiliation she endured at the gala had ignited something deep within her. A need not just for answers, but for justice. If the Pierces believed her mother was a thief, then the only way to clear her name was to prove otherwise. She pulled out her phone and stared at Gideon's assistant's number, scribbled hastily on the back of the invitation card. Her thumb hovered over the call button. But fear gnawed at her. What if giving him the ring meant losing it forever? What if she walked into a trap she couldn't escape? Her thoughts were interrupted by Chloe knocking on the door. Her best friend burst inside, holding 2 coffees. You didn't come home last night, so I figured you'd need caffeine." She paused when she saw the ring gleaming on the table. "Oh, Eliza, you're really going to do it?" Eliza's voice was steady, but her hands trembled. "I don't have a choice. They won't stop until they destroy her reputation. I can't let that happen." Chloe set the coffee down, eyes full of worry. "Then don't go alone. Promise me." Eliza nodded, though in her heart she knew some battles had to be fought alone. Later that evening, she slipped the ring into her pocket, its weight like a heartbeat against her skin. As she left the apartment, she glanced back at the darkened room, at the little comforts of her modest life. She knew nothing would ever be the same once she took this step. The city lights flickered around her as she boarded the bus toward downtown, where glass towers stretched into the sky like monuments to power. Somewhere inside one of them, Gideon Pierce was waiting, and as the bus rumbled forward, Eliza gripped the ring tighter, knowing she was crossing a line she could never uncross. Eliza expected Gideon to greet her when she arrived at Pierce Holdings' headquarters, but instead she was led into a private conference room. The walls were glass, giving a panoramic view of the city below, but the atmosphere was suffocating. She sat with her hands folded tightly in her lap, the ring hidden in her pocket, her mind racing with doubts. The door opened, not for Gideon, but for a woman. She was in her 40s, tall, with sharp features, softened only by her steady eyes. Her tailored suit fit like armor, her presence calm yet commanding. She set a leather briefcase on the table before speaking. "I'm Genevieve Adler," she introduced, sliding into the chair across from Eliza, "Mr. Pierce's attorney, and his fixer, depending on who you ask." Eliza stiffened. "So he sent his lawyer instead of facing me himself?" Genevieve tilted her head, studying her carefully. "Gideon doesn't waste time. If you're here, it means you're not irrelevant. But he also doesn't rush into situations he doesn't fully understand. That's where I come in." Eliza's heartbeat quickened. She had prepared to confront Gideon, not this woman who radiated quiet authority. Still, she refused to back down. "Then tell him I brought the ring." She pulled the velvet box from her pocket and set it on the table. Genevieve's eyes flickered, a reaction so small most would have missed it. She reached for the box, opening it slowly. When the gold phoenix caught the light, her calm facade wavered. She inhaled sharply before recovering. "Well," she murmured, "that complicates things." Eliza leaned forward. "It proves my mother isn't a thief. Or it proves she has the very ring that was stolen half a century ago," Genevieve countered evenly. But her tone wasn't cruel. It was probing, as though she was testing Eliza's resolve. "My mother never stole anything," Eliza said firmly. "She told me it was given to her by her father. She's clung to it her entire life, even when selling it could have paid her medical bills." For the first time, Genevieve's expression softened. She closed the box and pushed it back toward Eliza. "You're either very naive or very brave." "Which do you think?" Eliza asked quietly. Genevieve gave the faintest smile. "Both." She leaned back, crossing her arms. "Listen, Gideon will never admit it, but the Pierce family history isn't as pristine as they pretend. If your story is true, then your mother's ring could expose secrets they've buried for generations. Secrets that men like Julian would do anything to keep hidden." The name sent a chill down Eliza's spine. She thought of Julian's mocking smile, his cruel words. "So what happens now?" Genevieve's gaze hardened. "Now you need to be careful. Gideon may want the truth, but his cousin, he only wants to bury it, and bury you along with it." Eliza's pulse quickened. For the first time, she realized she wasn't just defending her mother's honor. She was stepping into a war between powerful men, and she had just found her first ally. The next day, Eliza sat across from Genevieve in a quiet corner of a downtown cafe. The polished lawyer looked out of place among chipped mugs and the faint smell of burnt toast, but she seemed to prefer the privacy it offered. Papers and folders were spread across the table, each marked with the Pierce family crest. "I pulled some records," Genevieve began, lowering her voice. "Officially, the Pierce family tree is simple. Wealth, succession, one heir after another. But unofficially—" She slid a faded photograph across the table. Eliza leaned closer. It showed two young men, both bearing the sharp features she had seen in Gideon's face. One stood confidently, a hand resting on the arm of a leather chair. The other sat beside him, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes shadowed with something unreadable. "That's Alaric Pierce, Gideon's great-grandfather," Genevieve explained, tapping the man who stood, the man who rebuilt the family fortune after the 1921 crash. And beside him, Daniel Pierce, his younger brother. Eliza frowned. "I've never heard of him." "Few have," Genevieve said grimly, "because Daniel was erased from the family history. According to whispers, he betrayed Alaric, tried to steal designs for a turbine engine, their key to dominance in the steel industry. And when he failed, he vanished. The family declared him dead. But—" She slid another document forward, a faded ledger with a single line circled. "Payment rendered, second signet ring commissioned." Eliza's breath caught. "Second ring?" Genevieve nodded. "Identical to the first. Alaric had one made for Daniel, hoping it would symbolize loyalty. Instead, it became a symbol of betrayal. After Daniel's exile, the Pierce family buried the truth. They insisted only one ring ever existed." Eliza's mind reeled. The velvet box in her pocket suddenly felt heavier. "So my grandfather was Daniel Pierce?" Genevieve didn't answer immediately. Instead, she leaned forward, her eyes sharp. "If your mother's story is true, if she inherited that ring from her father, then yes, which means you are a blood descendant of the Pierce family. But understand what that means, Eliza. To them, you are living proof of a scandal they've spent generations trying to erase." The cafe suddenly felt colder. Eliza wrapped her hands around her coffee cup, searching for warmth that wasn't there. A part of her wanted to run, to forget all of it. But another part burned with fire. Her mother had always told her the ring was a promise. Now she understood. It was also evidence. "I don't want their fortune," Eliza whispered. "I don't care about their empire. I just want my mother's name cleared." Genevieve's lips curved into something between pity and admiration. "And that's exactly why they'll fear you most, because you can't be bought." Eliza swallowed hard, realizing the truth was no longer just a family story. It was a weapon, and in the wrong hands, it could destroy her. The hospital room was dim when Eliza returned that evening. Rain pattered softly against the window, and the steady beep of the monitor filled the silence. Laura lay half asleep, her breathing shallow, her skin pale against the white sheets. Eliza sat by her side, clutching the velvet box. For hours she debated whether to speak, but the words pressed heavier with every passing minute. Finally she whispered, "Mum, I know about Daniel Pierce." Laura's eyes opened, clouded with both fatigue and fear. Her hand trembled as it reached for Eliza's. "Who told you that name?" "Genevieve Adler," Eliza admitted. "She showed me records. She said Daniel was erased from the family history, that he had the second ring. Was he your father?" Tears welled in Laura's eyes. For a moment, she turned her face away, as though shielding herself from the past. When she finally spoke, her voice was fragile but steady. "Yes, Daniel Pierce was my father, your grandfather, and the Pierce family would rather I had never been born." Eliza's throat tightened. "Then the ring—" "It was his gift," Laura said softly. "Before he died, he pressed it into my hand and said it was a promise that one day the truth would matter, that I must protect it, no matter what it costs me. And so I did. Even when people whispered that I was strange, even when I had nothing left, I never let go of it." She closed her eyes, a single tear sliding down her cheek. "Your grandfather wasn't perfect, Eliza. He made mistakes. He wanted more than what Alaric offered him, and he paid dearly for it. But he wasn't a thief. That ring was his, and when the family cast him out, they tried to erase every trace of him, including me." Eliza squeezed her mother's hand, her own eyes burning. "Why didn't you tell me sooner? Why let them brand you a liar?" "Because the Pierces are powerful," Laura whispered, "and power doesn't forgive. If they knew who you were, if they knew you carried Daniel's blood, they'd see you as a threat. I wanted to keep you safe, Eliza. That's why I never told you." Eliza shook her head, anger and sorrow warring inside her. "But hiding hasn't kept us safe. It's only made them bolder." Julian humiliated me in front of everyone. Gideon looked me in the eyes and accused you of theft. I can't stand by and let them rewrite our story." Laura's grip tightened weakly, her voice breaking. "Promise me you won't go too far, Eliza. Promise me you won't let their world swallow you whole." Eliza kissed her mother's forehead, but she didn't answer. Because deep inside, she knew a promise like that was impossible. For the first time, the truth had a name, and Eliza understood. This fight was no longer just about honor. It was about survival. Julian Pierce's smile didn't reach his eyes as he swirled a glass of bourbon in his private suite at the Grand Marlowe. The gala was over, but his fury hadn't cooled. He replayed the moment in his head. Eliza standing tall, her voice clear, challenging his family's honor in front of New York's elite. That humiliation was a wound, and Julian Pierce never forgave wounds. Across from him sat two men in dark suits, hired muscle with no names worth remembering. Julian leaned back, the glow of the city skyline spilling behind him. "The girl's getting too bold," he said, his voice low, venomous. "And Gideon's interest in her only makes things worse." One of the men shifted uneasily. "You want us to deal with her?" Julian's lips curved into a cold smirk. "Not yet. I don't want her gone. I want her broken. A waitress who dares to claim our bloodline, who dares to speak the name Pierce with defiance. No, she needs to be reminded of her place." He tapped the rim of his glass, thinking, "Start with her job. Make sure her diner gets a health inspection. One that doesn't end well. Let her feel the ground crumble beneath her feet." He paused, savoring the thought. And her mother. Hospitals run on donations, on influence. I'll make sure her bills get complicated. The men nodded, already pulling out their phones. Julian's gaze hardened. "And one more thing. Keep an eye on Genevieve Adler. She's been sniffing around places she shouldn't. If she sides with the girl, we'll make sure she regrets it." Julian rose, walking towards the massive window. His reflection stared back at him, sharp and polished. "Gideon thinks he can play savior," he muttered. "But he's blind. That girl isn't an innocent waitress. She's a threat, and threats are meant to be crushed." Meanwhile, across the city, Eliza felt the chill of invisible hands closing in. When she arrived for her next shift at the corner booth, her manager handed her a letter with a grim expression. "We've been flagged for violations," he said, voice heavy. "If we don't fix it immediately, we're shutting down. And frankly, Eliza, I think it's connected to you." Her stomach sank. It was too precise, too sudden to be coincidence. She thought of Julian's words at the gala, his promise wrapped in cruelty. Secrets have a way of destroying the people who chase them. That night, as she sat beside her mother's hospital bed, she received another blow. The nurse explained that Laura's treatment had been delayed due to administrative issues. Eliza knew exactly what that meant. Julian Pierce wasn't waiting for truth to surface. He was already moving pieces against her, turning her life into a battlefield she hadn't chosen but could no longer escape. The diner was empty when Eliza finished her shift. She sat in the back booth, staring at the "closed for inspection" sign taped to the door. The place that had kept her afloat, that had been her second home, now felt like a coffin. Her co-workers whispered about her, some sympathetic, others resentful. She couldn't blame them. Their jobs were on the line because she had crossed a billionaire's family. By the time she reached the hospital, her exhaustion had hardened into something darker. Her mother's treatments were postponed again, the nurse apologizing with pity in her eyes. "The insurance company has new restrictions," she explained softly. Eliza knew better. This wasn't about paperwork. It was Julian. Laura tried to smile, but her weak voice gave her away. "Don't carry this burden, sweetheart. If they want the ring, give it to them. It's not worth losing everything." Eliza shook her head fiercely, clutching her mother's hand. "No, Mum. They're trying to scare us. If I give up now, they'll win. They'll paint you as a thief forever. I won't let that happen." But later, alone in the sterile hospital hallway, Eliza broke. She pressed her forehead against the cold wall, tears streaming down her face. For the first time, the weight felt unbearable. She had lost her job, her mother's care was in jeopardy, and the world seemed to be closing in. That was when Genevieve called. Her voice was steady, but there was urgency beneath it. Julian is tightening his grip. I warned you he wouldn't play fair. If you want to survive this, you can't just defend yourself. You have to fight back. Eliza's voice cracked. Fight back how? I'm a waitress. He's a Pierce. You're more than that, Genevieve said firmly. You carry Daniel Pierce's blood. That means you're not an outsider. You're the living proof of their betrayal. If you want to clear your mother's name, you need to use that. But it won't be safe. Eliza wiped her tears, her chest heaving. For the first time, she saw the path laid out before her. Surrender and watch her mother fade away under the weight of lies, or fight and risk being destroyed. She opened the velvet box once more, staring at the phoenix ring. The sapphire eye seemed to glimmer with challenge, as if daring her to step into the fire. Her hand shook as she whispered into the empty hall. If they want a war, then I'll give them one. And with that vow, Eliza Holloway crossed the line from victim to fighter, ready to challenge the Pierce dynasty on their own battlefield. The second gala was even grander than the first. Held in a museum gilded with marble columns and priceless paintings, it was a celebration of the Pierce Foundation's charitable legacy. To the public, it was philanthropy. To those inside, it was another display of power. Eliza had no intention of attending, but Genevieve insisted. If you want the truth on your side, you need to stand where they can't ignore you. Tonight, the most influential families will be watching. That's the stage to strike. So Eliza arrived, her borrowed gown modest, compared to the jewels around her. But her presence commanded whispers the moment she stepped inside. She no longer looked like a timid waitress. Determination sharpened her gaze, and the velvet box in her clutch pulsed like a weapon waiting to be revealed. Gideon noticed her first. His eyes narrowed, but he didn't intervene. Instead, he watched, silent, as though curious to see how far she would go. Julian, however, wasted no time. He approached with his trademark smirk, his glass of champagne catching the chandelier light. Back again, waitress? Tell me, did you come to serve hors d'oeuvres, or more lies? Eliza held her ground. I came to tell the truth, something you wouldn't recognize if it stared you in the face. Gasps fluttered around them. Guests leaned in, eager for drama. Julian's smile turned venomous. The truth that your mother was handed stolen property by a disgraced traitor, that your bloodline is nothing but a shadow we erased decades ago? Eliza's chest tightened, but she didn't falter. The truth is that Daniel Pierce was more than your family's scapegoat, and the ring proves it. She opened the box, holding the phoenix ring high. Its sapphire eye glimmered like a spark of rebellion. The room erupted in murmurs. Some gasped in recognition, others whispered disbelief. Cameras flashed. Reporters had been invited to the gala, and now her defiance was public. Julian's composure cracked. His voice rose, sharper than intended. That ring is stolen. She admits it. Her family clung to a relic that doesn't belong to them. Arrest her if you must. The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Wealthy allies exchanged glances. They had come for champagne, not scandal. Gideon finally stepped forward, his voice cool but commanding. Enough, Julian. But Julian wasn't finished. He leaned close, his words meant for Eliza alone. Do you think you can embarrass me twice and walk away? You don't belong here. And if you keep pressing, I'll make sure you and your mother regret ever breathing the name Pierce. Eliza's hand shook around the ring, but her voice was steady. You've already tried to break me, Julian, and I'm still standing. The room buzzed with tension as Gideon's eyes flicked between them, realizing the war within his family had just exploded in front of the entire city. The gala's tension lingered long after the crowd dispersed. Reporters had been ushered out, murmurs of scandal trailing them into the night. Inside the Pierce estate, Gideon retreated to his private study, the weight of the evening pressing heavier than the mahogany walls around him. He poured a glass of scotch but didn't drink. Instead, he stared at the family portraits lining the shelves. His great-grandfather, Alaric, immortalized in oil paint, looked down with stern pride. But beside him, an empty frame had always hung, a deliberate absence where Daniel Pierce's likeness had once been. Eliza's voice echoed in Gideon's mind. The truth is that Daniel Pierce was more than your family's scapegoat, and the ring proves it. He clenched his jaw, The girl's defiance had unsettled him, but it wasn't her boldness alone. It was the fire in her eyes. It was familiar. Too familiar. Julian stormed into the study, fury radiating off him. "You let her humiliate us, again. She waved that cursed ring in front of the press. Do you have any idea what kind of storm you've invited?" Gideon's voice was calm, but cold. That storm was coming long before Eliza Holloway spoke. "You just didn't see it." Julian slammed his hand against the desk. "Don't you dare defend her. She's nothing. A waitress clinging to a lie. If we don't destroy her now, she'll unravel everything our family built. Or," Gideon countered, stepping closer, "she may reveal what our family destroyed." His words hung in the air like a blade. Julian's face twisted with rage. "You're starting to sound like her. Don't forget where your loyalty lies, cousin. Blood comes first. Always." Gideon turned away, staring at the skyline beyond the window. The city glittered below, a reminder of the empire resting on his shoulders. For years, he had believed the Pierce legacy was unshakable, built on resilience and vision. But if Eliza's story was true, then that empire stood on betrayal, and her bloodline was the proof. Genevieve entered quietly then, breaking the standoff. She placed a folder on the desk. "You asked me to dig deeper. I found records, hidden transactions, erased files. Daniel Pierce wasn't just cast out. He was stripped of everything he created. His designs were stolen, his name blackened, his heirs erased." Gideon opened the folder, his eyes scanning the evidence. The Scotch glass remained untouched at his side. His silence stretched, heavy with realization. Julian hissed, "Burn it, all of it, before she used it against us." But Gideon didn't move. His gaze shifted back to the empty frame on the wall. For the first time, doubt cracked the armor of his certainty. And in that silence, Gideon Pierce faced the choice that would define him: protect his family's legacy built on lies, or side with the truth, even if it meant standing against his own blood. The press conference was never meant to be hers. It was arranged by the Pierce Foundation to distract the media from the chaos of the gala, to remind the world of their philanthropic image. Yet when Eliza stepped into the hall, velvet box in hand, all cameras swung toward her as if destiny itself had shifted the spotlight. She had rehearsed the words 100 times in her head the night before. But now, standing at the podium, her heart pounded so violently she thought it might betray her. She could feel the weight of Gideon's stare from the front row, cold and unreadable. Beside him, Julian leaned back in his chair, a smirk etched across his face, certain she would collapse under the pressure. Eliza gripped the edges of the podium, forcing her voice steady. "My name is Eliza Holloway. For years my mother has been accused, silently, cruelly, of being a thief, of holding something that doesn't belong to her. Tonight, I'm here to tell you the truth." Gasps rippled through the room. The reporters leaned in, pens scratching, cameras flashing. Eliza opened the velvet box, lifting the golden phoenix ring into the light. Its sapphire eye gleamed under the flood of cameras, undeniable, unshakable. "This ring was passed down to my mother by her father," she continued, her voice growing stronger. "Her father was Daniel Pierce, brother to Alaric Pierce, great-grandfather of Gideon and Julian. Daniel was erased from history, branded a traitor, and cast out, but his blood lives on. I am his granddaughter. My mother is his daughter. And this ring is the proof they tried to bury." The room exploded into chaos. Reporters shouted over one another, flashes blinding her vision. Words like scandal, inheritance, betrayal filled the air. Julian shot to his feet, his face red with fury. "Lies!" he thundered. "She's manipulating you all. That ring was stolen. Her family clung to it like parasites." Eliza didn't flinch. She raised her voice above the noise, her words sharp as steel. "If it was stolen, why does it match the ledger your family erased? Why does it bear the same crest, the same sapphire, crafted for 2 brothers, not 1? You've hidden Daniel's name for decades, but you can't hide me. His blood runs in my veins, and I will not let my mother's honor be crushed by your lies." The hall fell into stunned silence. Even the reporters paused, pens frozen mid-air. Gideon's gaze lingered on her, his expression torn between pride and fear. For a moment, he seemed less like a billionaire, and more like a man caught in a storm he could no longer control. And in that silence, Eliza declared not just her lineage, but her defiance, standing unshaken before the dynasty that had tried to erase her existence. Julian's fury filled the hall like smoke, choking the air. His voice rose above the stunned silence, desperate and venomous. "You fools! You're listening to a waitress, a nobody who clawed her way into this family's name with lies and cheap tricks. That ring was stolen. She admits it. And if you print a single word of her nonsense, I'll have you all in court by morning." The reporters buzzed nervously, torn between fear of the Pierce power and the irresistible scent of scandal. But before the chaos could tip in Julian's favor, Genevieve Adler stood from her seat, a thick folder clutched in her hand. "Enough," she said firmly, her voice carrying with the authority of truth. She strode to the front, opening the folder with precise, deliberate movements. "I have documents, records buried for half a century, payment orders for 2 identical rings, designs signed by Alaric Pierce himself, and witness accounts from workers who saw Daniel cast out, stripped of credit for inventions that made this family rich." Gasps filled the room. Cameras whirred faster, reporters surging forward like wolves scenting blood. Julian's face was drained of color. You forged that! She paid you, didn't she?" He pointed at Eliza, his hands shaking. "This is what she is doing. She bought you to spread her lies." Genevieve's eyes narrowed. "Careful, Julian. Unlike you, I keep receipts. Every signature here is authenticated, every witness verified. You can try to bury the truth, but the evidence won't burn as easily as your threats." The crowd erupted again, reporters hurling questions. "Mr. Pierce, is it true your family erased an heir? Will Eliza Holloway claim inheritance rights? Did the Pierces build their fortune on betrayal?" Julian staggered under the barrage, his once polished veneer cracking. Sweat dotted his forehead as his composure collapsed. "You don't understand," he stammered, his voice breaking. "Daniel was a traitor. He tried to destroy everything. We had no choice but to erase him." His words slipped like oil into fire. The reporters seized on them instantly. "So you admit he existed? You admit the cover-up?" Julian froze, realizing too late he had condemned himself. The smirk, the arrogance, the cruel control. Gone. What remained was a man unraveling in front of flashing cameras, his downfall broadcast to the world. From the front row, Gideon rose slowly, his expression unreadable. He stepped beside Eliza, his presence commanding the room. "This family has hidden behind silence for too long," he said, his voice steady, heavy with finality. "The truth cannot be denied any longer. Daniel Pierce was wronged. His bloodline lives, and the lies that buried him will not bury his granddaughter." Julian stumbled back, his world collapsing. "You can't do this! You can't side with her!" His voice cracked, more plea than command. But the damage was done. In front of the world, Julian Pierce had fallen, not by Eliza's lies, but by his own desperate truths spilling free. The days that followed were a storm of headlines and scandal. Newspapers splashed with bold print, "Pierce dynasty built on lies, erased heir's granddaughter steps forward, Julian Pierce exposed." For the first time in generations, the Pierce empire shook, not from market crashes or rival companies, but from the truth. Eliza kept out of the spotlight, staying close to her mother's hospital bed. Laura's health was fragile, but the light in her eyes had returned. She no longer looked like a woman carrying shame. She looked like someone freed. "You did it," Laura whispered, tears sliding down her cheeks. "You gave me back my name." Eliza squeezed her hand. "No, Mum, you gave it to me. I just refuse to let them take it away." Across the city, Julian disappeared from public view, stripped of influence. Business partners abandoned him, and whispers of investigations into his financial dealings began to spread. The man who once laughed at Eliza from marble ballrooms now faced silence and disgrace. His threats had turned into nothing more than echoes. Gideon, however, was different. When he visited the hospital, he came not as the untouchable billionaire, but as a man burdened by truth. He stood quietly at Laura's bedside, his voice low but steady. "Your father should never have been erased. What was taken from him can never be restored fully. But his bloodline will no longer be denied." Laura looked at him, her eye soft but firm. "I don't want your empire, Gideon. I only wanted my daughter to live without shame." Gideon nodded. "And she will. Whatever power I hold, I'll use to protect her name, and yours." Eliza studied him, uncertain whether to trust the man who once humiliated her. But in his eyes, she saw not arrogance, but something closer to respect, perhaps even redemption. Weeks later, the hospital bills were paid in full, not by charity, but through legal restitution from the Pierce Foundation. Genevieve ensured every document was signed, every debt cleared. Eliza returned to the diner, not because she needed the job, but because it grounded her. The same customers came in, some whispering, others smiling knowingly. She wasn't just the waitress anymore. She was the woman who stood against giants and won. On a quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the skyline, Eliza opened the velvet box once more. The phoenix ring glimmered, its sapphire eye no longer a burden, but a symbol of survival. She slipped it onto her finger, the weight no longer heavy, but empowering. Her mother watched from the couch, smiling faintly. "It suits you," Laura said. Eliza smiled back, her heart swelling with something she hadn't felt in years. Peace. And as the city lights flickered to life, Eliza Holloway knew this was not just the end of a battle, but the beginning of a life where her family's honor shone brighter than the lies that once tried to bury it. So that's how the story closes, my dear friends. You're still here with me, right? If you've stayed until now, it means something inside this story touched your heart in a special way. Maybe it reminded you of your own struggles, the weight of family, or the times you had to stand tall when the world tried to break you. Eliza's journey teaches us that dignity and truth are treasures no one can steal. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus once said, "It's not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." And that's exactly what we saw. When shame and lies tried to crush her, Eliza chose courage. She chose to protect her mother's honor, even when the cost seemed unbearable. In life, we don't always control the storms, but like Marcus Aurelius reminded us, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. That strength is what carries us through. If this story touched you, share it with someone who needs hope today. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and join our growing family here, because together we remind each other, no matter the lies, the truth and honor will always rise.